Imagine closing on your dream desert home, only to find out the city might shut off your water, and suddenly your property value is vanishing fast. Staring at the cracked ground where your lawn once thrived, you realize the Arizona dream is turning into a financial nightmare. This isn't hype. Thousands of homeowners across the Grand Canyon state are facing this dry reality. While agents sell sunshine, the Colorado River is shrinking, groundwater is dropping, and officials are limiting new construction. The result? A housing market colliding with environmental limits. In a place where water is more precious than gold, home prices are reflecting scarcity. In this guide to the 10 Arizona cities running out of water, I'll show you where wells are drying up and equity is evaporating. Stick around to see which booming suburb can't approve a single new home, and the #1 spot where residents are trucking in water just to flush toilets. Number 10. Gilbert. You probably recognize Gilbert as that polished, family-oriented community southeast of Phoenix, the kind of suburb that constantly shows up on lists of the safest places to live. On the surface, it checks every box, until you start digging into the water situation and the housing numbers. Here's where things get uncomfortable. Gilbert depends heavily on the Colorado River for its water supply. And whenever the federal government officially declares a shortage, communities like this are among the first to feel the squeeze. I was reviewing figures from the United States Bureau of Reclamation, and Arizona's share of river water has been reduced more aggressively year after year. That puts enormous strain on towns that built their image around green parks, artificial lakes, and perfectly maintained landscaping. The real estate market seems to be reacting, almost like it has a nervous tick. Data from Redfin shows that the median home price in Gilbert has been bouncing around, struggling to regain the peak levels we saw in previous years. Pending sales in some months have dropped roughly 17% compared to the same time last year. To me, that signals hesitation. Buyers aren't just worried about interest rates anymore, they're questioning whether the area makes sense long-term. Inventory tells a similar story. Homes are now sitting on the market for more than 40 days on average. That might not sound dramatic, but compared to the frenzy we witnessed 2 years ago, when properties disappeared in a weekend, it feels like a major slowdown. And here's the part that really raises eyebrows. The town has moved into stricter phases of water conservation. This isn't just friendly reminders to limit lawn watering. Officials are considering mandatory reductions. A report from the Arizona Department of Water Resources pointed out that groundwater replenishment expenses are climbing fast. Now imagine trying to close a deal while explaining to a potential buyer that water rates could potentially double over the next decade. That glossy suburban appeal starts to lose its shine when desert realities move front and center. Yes, Gilbert is still attractive. But when you see price reductions on platforms like Zillow affecting roughly a quarter of active listings, you have to ask yourself whether savvy investors are already stepping back. Number 9. Williams. If you head north, it's easy to assume that cooler temperatures automatically mean a safer, more stable water supply. But Williams completely shatters that assumption. Known as the gateway to the Grand Canyon, this small mountain town depends heavily on tourism to survive. The problem? It's now staring down a serious water shortage that could undermine the very industry keeping its economy afloat. Unlike larger cities with multiple supply sources, Williams relies almost entirely on surface water, particularly from reservoirs like Dogtown Lake and Kaibab Lake. These lakes are extremely vulnerable to prolonged drought, and when rainfall drops, water levels follow quickly. I came across a municipal report from the city itself admitting that during peak summer season, when tourists flood the area, they're barely able to meet existing demand. Supporting additional residential growth? That's practically off the table. The housing market is starting to reflect that instability. Data from Realtor.com shows that while the number of homes for sale has ticked upward, the pool of interested buyers is thinning out. In other words, momentum is fading. Median listing prices have plateaued, and in certain segments, values are sliding by roughly 5 to 8%. That shift suggests locals and investors alike are recognizing a hard truth. The infrastructure simply isn't built to handle significant population growth. At times, the city has even imposed temporary moratoriums on new building permits because it couldn't guarantee water hookups for additional properties. For a real estate market that depends on expansion and optimism, that's a serious red flag. Now step back and look at this from a personal angle. Imagine owning a short-term rental here, counting on steady Grand Canyon tourism revenue, only for the city to announce strict water restrictions. No outdoor irrigation, no refilling hot tubs, limited usage overall. That instantly chips away at the town's vacation appeal. Reports from the United States Drought Monitor regularly categorize this region as being in severe to extreme drought. In particularly dry years, reservoir levels have fallen to dangerously low points, sometimes dipping below 40% capacity. Pair that with home prices hovering around $300 per square foot, which is steep for a town grappling with water reliability, and you start to see the imbalance. It sets the stage for a potential market correction. Number 8. Casa Grande. You probably see Casa Grande as that easy stop off the highway between Phoenix and Tucson, a place where factories are expanding and land still feels relatively affordable. But when I started digging into the hydrological data for Pinal County, the picture became a lot less comforting for anyone who owns property there. Casa Grande sits right in the heart of the Pinal Active Management Area, a groundwater region that state officials have effectively labeled as overdrawn. This isn't just a rough patch caused by a dry year or two. It's a long-term structural problem. The Arizona Department of Water Resources has projected a groundwater shortfall of nearly 8 million acre-feet over the next century if pumping continues at its current pace. That's not a minor imbalance. That's a massive geological deficit that optimism alone won't solve. When I turned to the housing market, the strain was already visible. Data from Atom Data Solutions shows foreclosure activity in Pinal County rising above the national average. That's often an early warning sign that financial pressure is building beneath the surface. For the first time in years, listings are beginning to stack up instead of disappearing overnight. Buyers seem more cautious, likely rattled by water-related headlines. Recent sales data from Redfin reveals that nearly 60% of homes are closing below their asking price. That tells you sellers are losing negotiating power and may be eager to exit before restrictions tighten further. The new construction sector paints an even bleaker picture. Several large developers have postponed, or outright canceled, planned communities because they can't secure the required certificate of assured water supply. Without that approval, residential development simply can't move forward, and raw land loses much of its intended value. That slowdown directly impacts appreciation potential for homes already built. Growth fuels price gains, and when growth stalls, so does momentum. Then there's the utility side of the equation. Local water providers have filed for rate increases exceeding 30% in some cases, citing the rising cost of drilling deeper wells and upgrading aging infrastructure. Imagine relocating here for relatively affordable housing, only to discover your monthly water bill rivals your car payment. Number 7. El Mirage. El Mirage is the kind of blue-collar West Valley community that doesn't usually grab headlines. It tends to blend into the background. But after going through recent environmental assessments and housing data, I honestly think this city deserves a flashing warning light. Geographically, El Mirage sits near the dry riverbed of the Agua Fria River and depends on a combination of groundwater and supplies from the Central Arizona Project, both of which are under mounting pressure and facing potential reductions. And here's the twist. The challenge isn't only about how much water is available. It's also about how expensive it is to make that water usable. When I reviewed municipal water quality reports, I found that the city has to invest heavily in treating groundwater contaminated with nitrates and other pollutants. Those treatment costs don't just disappear, they're passed straight on to residents through higher utility bills. The local housing market seems to be absorbing that stress. Tracking data on Zillow, I saw home values in El Mirage decline by around 6% over the past year. That may sound modest on paper, but in a community where median incomes are already tight, a drop like that can seriously erode household wealth. Another detail stood out. A significant portion of homes here are owned by large-scale investment groups, the kind often described as Wall Street landlords. Lately, though, many of them appear to be trimming their holdings. When institutional investors start heading for the exits, they typically release a wave of properties onto the market. That surge in supply pushes prices down even more. In fact, active listings have climbed more than 40% compared to 2 years ago, creating an inventory surplus that buyers don't seem eager to absorb. And buyers? They're clearly cautious. Average days on market have stretched to about 60 days before homes go under contract. In real estate terms, that's a long wait, especially in a region that recently experienced rapid-fire sales. What adds to the concern are the city's own utility rate studies, which project annual water and sewer increases in the range of 5 to 7% just to keep aging infrastructure operational. That's not for major upgrades. That's simply to maintain what already exists. So if you're considering paying roughly $350,000 for a three-bedroom house here, you have to pause and think. Why step into a market where property values are softening while water costs steadily climb? Number 6. Goodyear. Goodyear was one of the biggest winners during the pandemic housing surge. Distribution centers were going up almost overnight, and sprawling master-planned neighborhoods kept pushing farther into the desert. For a while, it felt unstoppable. But that momentum has slammed into a wall, and there's official documentation to back it up. The Arizona Department of Water Resources released a major study on the Hassayampa Subbasin, the underground aquifer system that much of Goodyear depends on. The findings were sobering. The basin is significantly overallocated. In simple terms, there isn't enough water projected to support all the development that's already been approved. We're not talking about minor red tape or a bureaucratic delay. This is the kind of structural shortage that can freeze growth in its tracks. When I started examining the housing data, the ripple effects were obvious. According to Redfin, the share of listings with price reductions in Goodyear has climbed sharply, approaching 30% of active homes in certain months. That's not a subtle shift. That's sellers adjusting expectations fast. There's a growing sense of urgency. If new building permits slow down or stop altogether, a local economy heavily tied to construction and expansion could feel the strain almost immediately. New construction numbers are also flashing warning signs. Cancellation rates on new home contracts have risen, with buyers backing out after learning more about the area's water constraints. Builders are being left with completed spec homes and fewer committed buyers. The financial pressure doesn't end there. Development fee schedules show that the cost of securing water credits for new homes has jumped by several $1,000s per property. And let's be clear, builders aren't absorbing that increase. They're passing it directly to buyers, inflating home prices in a market that's already losing steam. Right now, the median sale price is struggling to stay above $450,000. That's a significant investment in a city facing hard limits on future water access. Even the rental market is starting to cool. Vacancy rates are inching upward as job growth, particularly the kind tied to ongoing construction, begins to slow. When the building boom loses energy, so does the demand for housing tied to it. Number 5. Kingman. Kingman stands out for a troubling reason. It's not only dealing with water shortages, it's been criticized for effectively allowing vast amounts of groundwater to be pumped with minimal restriction. And that controversy has sent shockwaves through the local housing market. Located in Mojave County, the area drew national attention after foreign-owned agricultural operations began extracting large volumes of groundwater to grow alfalfa for export. After spending time reviewing local news coverage and transcripts from heated town hall meetings, one message comes through loud and clear. Residents believe the aquifer is declining fast. Longtime domestic wells that once reliably supplied family homes are now faltering. Some are producing reduced flow. Others have gone dry entirely. For homeowners, that's not an inconvenience, it's a financial emergency. Fixing the problem isn't cheap. Drilling a deeper replacement well can run anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000, a cost many households simply aren't prepared to shoulder. That looming liability is casting a long shadow over property values. Data from Zillow shows housing inventory in Kingman rising more than 25% compared to last year. It appears many owners are trying to sell before their well systems fail altogether. At the same time, the absorption rate, the pace at which homes actually sell, has slowed dramatically. Listings are sitting for months. Savvy buyers are insisting on detailed well inspections, and if tests reveal weak water flow, transactions often collapse on the spot. Pricing trends aren't encouraging either. While Kingman has historically been considered affordable, median home values are hovering around $280,000 and struggling to keep pace with inflation. That kind of stagnation erodes real wealth over time. Investor activity has cooled as well. Cash buyers, including house flippers looking for bargains, appear less interested in properties burdened by water uncertainty. Even speculative buyers tend to avoid assets tied to unreliable infrastructure. Adding to the tension, local water authorities have discussed tighter oversight and potential metering requirements for private wells. For many residents who moved here seeking independence and fewer regulations, that prospect undermines part of the town's original appeal. Number 4. Queen Creek. Queen Creek might be one of the fastest examples of suburban expansion in the state. What was once open farmland and dusty fields transformed almost overnight into gated neighborhoods, manicured streets, and upscale master-planned communities. But when I started analyzing the town's water portfolio, the rapid growth looked far less stable. Beneath the surface, it feels less like solid infrastructure and more like a delicate balancing act. Queen Creek expanded so aggressively that it outpaced its own groundwater capacity. To keep up, officials have turned to buying water rights from agricultural properties farther away and arranging to transport that supply back into town. Municipal budget documents show millions of dollars allocated to these acquisitions. And eventually, those costs don't stay on paper. They show up in residents' monthly utility bills. The housing market is beginning to reflect that strain. According to data from the Cromford Report, Queen Creek is experiencing one of the largest inventory buildups in the Phoenix metro area. Supply is stacking up, while fewer buyers seem willing to pay peak-era prices. On a price-per-square-foot basis, median sales figures have dropped nearly 10% from the height of the buying frenzy. For homeowners who purchased at the top of the market, that represents a significant erosion of equity. There's also an interesting shift happening in the luxury tier. Properties featuring oversized pools, expansive lawns, and elaborate landscaping are lingering far longer than simpler homes. Buyers appear increasingly sensitive to long-term water and maintenance costs. It's not just about aesthetics anymore. It's about sustainability and monthly expenses. In fact, average water bills in Queen Creek are already among the highest in the region, largely due to the expense of transporting and securing additional supply. Combine that with mortgage rates hovering around 7%, and affordability metrics start to crack. Application data shows debt-to-income ratios in this area stretching toward uncomfortable levels. Many households are highly leveraged in a town still working to secure its most fundamental resource. Local leaders continue to emphasize that they have a 100-year water supply plan. But when you examine the urgency behind recent water purchases and long-term commitments, the confidence feels more like reassurance than certainty. Number 3. Phoenix. Now we come to Phoenix, the blazing epicenter of this entire crisis. You can't seriously examine Arizona's water challenges without confronting what's happening in the state's capital, where the urban heat island effect has intensified dramatically. When I compared long-term weather patterns with municipal utility data, the connection was impossible to ignore. The city has endured record-breaking stretches of days above 110 degrees, and every spike in temperature sends water demand soaring. Lawns, cooling systems, pools, everything pulls harder on supply precisely as allocations from the Colorado River are being reduced at the federal level. This isn't some distant theoretical risk. It's unfolding in real time, and the housing market is reacting. Transaction data from Redfin shows that home sales volume in Phoenix has fallen nearly 20% compared to last year. Activity has slowed to a crawl. Buyers are hesitant, and sellers are adjusting expectations. One of the clearest signals comes from institutional investors. For years, firms such as BlackRock and Opendoor aggressively purchased homes across Phoenix neighborhoods. Recently, however, their acquisition activity has dropped sharply, by more than half in certain quarters. These companies rely on detailed risk modeling. If they're scaling back because of climate exposure and rising operating costs, that should raise eyebrows. Meanwhile, filings at the Maricopa County Justice Courts show eviction and foreclosure cases trending upward, even surpassing pre-pandemic levels. Residents are being squeezed from multiple directions: inflation, higher utility bills, and broader economic pressure. Some simply can't keep up. The median home price is hovering around $440,000. But the deeper issue isn't just price, it's livability. Many neighborhoods are replacing grass lawns with desert landscaping to conserve water. While that reduces usage, Some urban planning reports suggest it may also intensify localized heat, subtly reshaping how comfortable and ultimately how desirable certain areas become over time. On top of that, home insurance premiums are creeping higher, partly due to elevated wildfire risk along the expanding edges of the metro area. Phoenix is enormous. Cities of this scale don't pivot quickly, but right now, it appears to be moving straight toward a convergence of extreme heat and tightening water supply. Number 2. Buckeye. If you want to see where a housing boom meets a water crisis head-on, look no further than Buckeye. This city once had plans to triple its population, aiming to become one of the largest municipalities in the U.S. by land area. Ambitious subdivisions and sprawling communities were on the drawing board. Then the Arizona Department of Water Resources released a harsh reality check. Their report revealed that the Hasayampa sub-basin, the underground water source Buckeye depends on, is severely overallocated. Following that, Governor Katie Hobbs announced that any new subdivisions requiring a certificate of assured water supply would be paused. Essentially, the city's future growth was put on hold. Imagine planning a sprawling suburban dreamscape only to be told the well is officially tapped out. The market reacted immediately. Land deals collapsed overnight. Large developers with options on thousands of acres began walking away, leaving projects unfinished and plans abandoned. For current homeowners, the consequences are serious. Without growth, the tax base can't expand to fund infrastructure, and property values are stagnating. Zillow data shows that Buckeye home values have recently been some of the softest in the valley, with little to no appreciation. And in real terms, factoring in inflation, some owners are actually losing value. Equity is effectively trapped. Homeowners who purchased a new build in the past 2 years are now competing with builders who are slashing prices just to move inventory before packing up. Incentives of $30,000 to $40,000 per home are common, including bought-down interest rates, making it nearly impossible for regular homeowners to compete on resale. The water report forecasts a 15% unmet demand over the next century. That figure reads like a tombstone for Buckeye's explosive growth era. It's a city plastered with for sale signs, but the tap is running dry and buyers are disappearing. Number 1. Rio Verde foothills. This is the ultimate cautionary tale, the absolute worst-case scenario for the Southwest. Rio Verde foothills sits just outside Scottsdale, and for years residents depended entirely on hauled water, trucks filling up at a Scottsdale standpipe and delivering it to private tanks. Then, on January 1, 2023, Scottsdale cut off the supply to prioritize its own citizens. The resulting chaos was nothing short of apocalyptic. Picture living in a modern home and having to wonder if a truck will arrive with enough water for showers, toilets, or even basic household needs. It turned a quiet, rural enclave into a national news story practically overnight. Residents scrambled to cope as the cost of hauled water skyrocketed. Some were paying nearly $600 a month just to cover essential usage. People skipped showers, relied on disposable dishes, and watched landscaping wither. Even though a temporary arrangement was eventually reached, the damage to the housing market was severe. Confidence in the area's reliability has been shattered. Who would purchase a home where water depends on political negotiation and logistics rather than a fixed supply? Listings tell the story. Homes once valued above $1 million sat stagnant for months. Sellers had to disclose water uncertainties, which is basically a buyer repellent. Some properties lingered on the market for hundreds of days. The result? Custom homes with stunning mountain views are effectively unsellable because there's no guarantee water will flow next year. This goes far beyond a market correction. It's a complete market failure. In Arizona, water isn't just a utility. It is the core value proposition of every property. Without it, your million-dollar mansion is little more than stucco and concrete in the dirt. A monument to the hubris of thinking the desert could sustain endless growth. The era of unlimited expansion is over. Homeowners are left holding the bag, living with the constant anxiety of what happens if the next truck doesn't show up. The desert has always demanded respect for its limitations, yet the modern housing boom largely ignored that rule.